Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we'll bring you day 570 of Russian war with Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Alexey Arestovych, and his new pals in his new format, Yuriy Romanenko and Nikolay Feldman. Our sincere thanks go to Bill. Thank you, Bill, for your support. And Clever Pittsburgh, thank you for joining, and welcome to our membership. With this, let's deep dive into day 570. There are a lot of news. Hi everybody, this is Project Alpha, my name is Nikolay Feldman, we're starting War Diary with Alexey Arestovych. It streams live on his channel, it also streams live on Yuriy Romanenko channel, and of course here on Alpha Media we start streaming as well. Hi Alexey, glad to have you with us, we're awaiting Yuri to join us in a minute. But without holding our audience, there's a ton of news. We have not been live last week a couple times. This is because of some travels that might continue further into this month. But anyway, we'll try to continue doing at least once or twice a week. Actually, Nikolai, no, it should be all right. I think the hottest period is over now. It's semi-hot, so I think we will be on time. Okay, we'll have a ton of news, Alexey. A ton of news from the front. 72nd Special Brigade, supposedly completely destroyed. Over on the Eastern Front, they were completely cut off from their supplies and destroyed over a couple days. The head of the intel for that brigade was liquidated, also commander of the battalion, and most of their troops were also destroyed. So I understand a lot of news from Andreevka, Klishevka, and near Bakhmut. I like the loud words that some of the news makers use, but the thing is that there is a road that connects these settlements with Gorlovka, which is basically a stronghold at this point, and this is a junction between Lugansk and Donetsk and regions, and our defense of that region actually crumbled when they took that road that was providing supplies. Yeah, here is Gorlovka down at the bottom. So the moment when we take it is when they crumble. So now they have to push further to the east, actually more to the northeast, I think. That's where they will have to regroup. So this is definitely a serious achievement by 3rd Brigade, and it's not just 3rd, but it's the 3rd that took Andreevka, this one in the middle. And what's also characteristic here is that 3rd Brigade and their neighbors were attacking the enemy who was bigger than them by several times. This is against any military books when you use smaller numbers to take fortifications and positions of the enemy that is larger than you. But that's our constant story. It's a similar thing down south in Rabotina and Staromayorska. They are attacking with small numbers on bigger numbers. These are tremendous achievements currently, but in the general framework that I did announce before, where I said that I don't quite understand why do we need to achieve these successes under Bakhmut, because of its geography, at best it might be operative success, operative strategic, but not full strategic. The main success that we need, if our 3rd Brigade would be doing the same thing down south instead of east. But of course it's not a third to blame, it's our leadership, it's our command that decided to use them on the east. But you know my position that we need to be using this effort down at the south and going towards the mouth of Crimea Peninsula. This will return most of the south to Ukraine, and it will boost Ukraine morale and also show very visible results. And that's when some of the best detachments being used on the Eastern Front, I don't quite understand what are they doing there, but in any case we can congratulate them with these outstanding successes, because from military point of view everything was done perfectly. There is, yeah, it's a book-like example. In the meantime, the enemy is regrouping to the north of Bakhmut. They got some reserves there and they hope to push back. So if we are pushing the southern flank, they are trying to push the north flank. So they want to try to make the front line rotating. We'll see if they succeed or not. And also to finish up north in Kupiansk and Kremennoye, in the northeast. That's where they bring some of the new troops. They're trying to set their new command lines. You can see a lot of red arrows also indicating the directions of attack. And they've done that several times already, so I don't think they will succeed this time. They might capture maybe a kilometer or 200 yards of forests over there. First of all, we'll take everything back. Second, it's not what they expected to achieve when they concentrated 100,000 troops on that side. They were supposed to reach to the end of Lugansk region and announce that it's completely taken from Ukraine. But I do not see any perspectives for Russian side still. So you mean Svatovo Kremennoye, that, yeah, Kupiansk Kremennoye up north. They don't even have enough operative density there, looking at it. There are not too many right now. The terrain doesn't even allow to use large numbers in that corner. They aggregated larger numbers, but in the wrong terrain. This is a very idiotic direction for offensive maneuvers. I understand that Russian leadership was pushed forward by political tasks that was set in front of them to reach the borders of Lugansk region and to announce that finally completely annex the whole region. But on the other hand, war is a continuation of politics with different means. And in Russia, politicians do not listen to their military, for which I think we can be grateful. I have a couple more questions about Andreevka, Klishchevka, that line, that vertical line of several settlements where Ukraine just had good successes. Russian reporters are sowing panic in their blogs and saying that the front is almost cracked up and might actually crumble. Do you think it's just deceiving and maneuvering? No, it's actually real stuff. Sometimes I cannot say this is a psyop. In this case, we are aware where they are, what they do, and for a proper psyop, it needs to be both ways, right? It needs to be bloggers talking about that, reporters talking about that, and then military detachments doing certain things to support that theory. It's kind of when we did, remember we did that in Kharkov region when we attracted their best detachments into Kherson in the south from Kharkov. And we tried to destroy them there as well. We failed to destroy them all. They withdrew and finally left Kherson. But at least we lured them in. That was a good campaign. But their current state on the Eastern Front is very poor. So they don't really have resources to lure us anywhere. They barely trying to hold it. Okay, got it. Okay, so then another interesting thing that happened last week, the meeting of Putin and Kim Jong-un. We did not comment much on that. The results of it. At the end of it, Kim Jong-un made a statement that partnership with Russia is strategic against imperialism throughout the world. And some analysts are writing that just 6 years ago, his pal Putin signed sanctions against Korea, being in some solidarity with so-called imperialism throughout the world. And now the tables have turned and Putin is begging for arms from North Korea, which he sanctioned a few years ago back. And people are saying he even agreed, they even reached some agreement to get some of the armaments. Yeah, our military already are saying that we have some of the Korean shells already popping up on the front. And those who are using them, they're already complaining that it's more difficult to use them. They're difficult to store, and there are some nuances as to how to use Korean shells, so it is not so easy. And they also need, just shells themselves, they don't really change the picture, but they do need at least more artillery systems. If you follow the stats, every day we're destroying at least 20 of the artillery systems per day. Recently we had a new achievement, we destroyed 47 during one day. And in order to change the current picture, first they need more systems, artillery systems, and second they need millions of these Korean shells to change anything. And I don't think this is real. I think that Japan and South Korea will immediately react to that if they have not already done so. The attempt of North Korea of conducting some proxy war in their geopolitical interests. And on the Russian side, they're already saying that there were some interesting things happening with South Korea and Japan, and that Ukraine should be expecting some things from them. They're actually saying that something has already been shipped to the United States, and from states it may show up in our front line. And it would be very naive from Russian side to not expect Japan and South Korea to join the fray if North Korea is already engaged. North Korea is their named adversary, named itself, and continues their politics in the same manner. So I'm suspecting that even given the fact that they will have to pay the price for North Korean shells, and they understood that likely will be something coming from Japan and South Korea, they probably did not have much choice. The situation on the front is rather difficult for them to be careful, so they just wanted more shells. And we understand that the West will as well respond to that, and we know what production rate is in Russia, we know what production rate we can expect, what production rate is in North Korea, and I think we'll be taking care of that situation. Hi Yuri, I have a commentary from NATO from Robert Bauer. He said that problems on the battlefield and the economy are pushing Russia deeper and deeper into the arms of very despicable players in the world. Russia needs to cooperate with them and is becoming more and more dependent on them. And there is some irony in here, because turning to North Korea is basically a last hope call. It's a Hail Mary on Russian side. I also have information that these actions from North Korea will likely be reflected in the equal movements by South Korea, which is also becoming a very well-known player on the arms market. And our main partner, Poland, recently signed contracts with South Korea on tanks and artillery and other systems. So it is obvious that South Korea is getting more funds and more motivation to work with Ukraine, and will continue working with Ukraine in supplies of different nomenclature items for the front. So these are the sad news for Russia. Awesome. All right. Next news. We have a bunch of news from EU. We can start with Germany. Over there, government and military are expecting that the war in Ukraine might continue till 2032. And the head of Bundeswehr, the head of Situation Committee in Ministry of Defense, Christian Freuding, and he is quoted that he expects the war in Ukraine to continue about 9 years. All the time, Bundeswehr will continue supplying Ukraine with arms and shells and other nomenclature items for the war. And they are aligned in supporting Ukraine till 2032, and they are ready to support Ukraine in this long war. I remember your statement in April, Alexey, when you actually outlined that framework, and you said that even later there likely will be some issues, that after 32, 35, there probably will be 42 and 45 in this century, which caused a lot of ruckus, and people were saying you should not be saying that. But look, we're a year and a half in, and now Germany is talking about that too. Not just somebody, but the whole general who is in charge of the Ministry of Defense actions in regards to Ukraine. I'll repeat my thesis. They have not changed Nikolai, right? Russia is looking for a new shape, new form of an empire. Following the timeline, it likely will find something by 2035, 2032. Until that time, there will be some active phase of fighting on the front. But this active phase doesn't mean that it will be a hot war. It can mean it, but it doesn't have to. The war may be done with, but it's very likely that Russia will continue to wage war with whatever means they will still have. Economic, diplomatic, media, we are in a long conflict with Russia. And this is what we need to keep in mind looking and devising our strategies for the next decades. Under some conditions, there could be actually a hot phase of war for several more years. I'm not sure if it'll last to 2032, but maybe. I think Russia is not capable of continuing the hot war in that framework, but, possibility. This can only happen only if China decides to fully support Russian military action, or if Russia finds another source that is capable of arming and equipping hundreds, thousands of people with military gear. And I don't see anybody besides China who can do that. North Korea, I'm concerned that they're not capable of doing it, but still, even after the hot phase of the war is over, the counterposition will still continue. Here's a simple scenario. Not a single Russian soldier on our territory, but they continue shelling us with missiles from across the border. That phase was an Iran-Iraq war when both sides exhausted their active capabilities, but they were shelling each other with missiles. We can be facing a similar story very soon as well. And the only answer is to really develop our military-industrial complex, to increase our capability and be ready for prolonged defense. If by 2035 Russia finds a new shape of empire in some capacity, what do you think our relations be like then? Yeah, right, not too friendly, exactly. If they find themselves in a crisis, they may get another chance in 42, 45, 10 years later after that reformatting. And that's where we can win. That's where we can use this time. But it will depend a lot on our allies here. If we can establish good defense system together with Poland, and we need to establish good working relations with our main allies, European Union, NATO, United States, and Britain. And of course, not forgetting about our potential allies in the Arab countries and in Scandinavian countries. For that, we need very strong, very grown-up politics in the works. We need to have a calculator on the table. We need to be calculating money and time and investments and everything. Of course, ideas that we are pushing now is good, but we need to make sure our allies are interested in supporting Ukraine because, let's say, there is some production here that they invested, and that their well-being depends upon our capability to defend the whole Europe. So that's what we need to be working on. That's what me and Yuri were busy on this week when we talked with Romania. We're explaining Romanians how important and what are the proper angles could be between our two countries, that we have to be really close friends. And they know it themselves, but just clarifying a few things there. All right, there are a couple more news I wanted to bring today. Let's comment on Poland. Minister of Development and Technology in Poland, Voldemar Buda, signed on Friday a decree about prohibiting Ukrainian agriculture products on the territory of Poland, their imports too. And he thanked his agriculture counterparts for cooperating with him. We know that Shmyhal promised that if Poland will do that here in Ukraine, that Ukraine will go into some courts, will follow through with some arbitrage, and regardless of these statements, Poland still implemented these limitations on the Ukrainian goods on Polish territory. How do you think Ukraine needs to act in this case? I think Yuri can comment better on this situation, and I will add more to it. Okay, I think it's the start of an operation, hedgehog on a cactus. This is a Ukrainian hedgehog sitting on the Polish cactus. We did everything for Polish allies to actually implement these restrictions because some of actions of our businessmen they could not have been left unanswered. It's the election time in Poland. I was just walking there a few days ago. There are a lot of political fighting, and it's pretty rough. They actually are competing for the voices, both key parties or both key groups that are fighting for power. They're fighting actively, and it would be stupid to not expect them to react on the Ukrainian shenanigans. And one of the parties, of course, reflects the issues that these Ukrainian exports cause with Polish agriculture sector. So, of course, they're putting that on their slogans, and Ukraine can appeal to different places in European Union, etc. But we see that Poles are actively fighting and winning whenever the question about their interests come up with European Commission. So I'm 100% sure that we will have to go for some compromise with them. And since we still depend and strategically depend on good relations with Poland, I think our strategic interests are more valuable than the financial interests of a few grain dealers who decided to make some money on Polish market. And we talked about that. We talked about that with Alexey on several conferences before, and I think we are overdue for some good gesture toward Poland. And there's a simple one we can do is basically allow Poland to exhume and work with them together, the victims of some of the events of the 20th century, of Volhynia region. And it doesn't it doesn't cost us much. That would be a great step for Poland to see us welcoming them and working with them. So joint work always requires, good partnership always requires to understand the interests of both parties, and hopefully we'll find a way to get out of this weird situation that we put ourselves in, and actually to make Poles to do these sanctions, to slap these sanctions on us. So we need to find a way to undo that on our side. Right. So that situation is being repeated over and over again when some of the commercial interests take over the strategic interests of the country. We need now to focus our fight here in Ukraine on those people who decide to make money on our neighbors, and basically those who are affecting our strategic interests by doing so. Those people need to go to jail, I think. And we shouldn't be fighting with our immediate neighbors. When we quarrel with Israel, this is idiotic, but that can be somehow, there are a couple of things there to explain. But when we cause ruckus with Poles, these are our immediate allies. They're supplying military transport and everything to us through Poland. And the whole idea of the West is to actually use Ukraine and Poland as two fangs on that front, two strongholds on the Eastern Front, to not allow Russia to start another war in Europe. The idea is simple, that if there is a conflict with China over in that part of the world, Russia needs to be held so tightly that it would not be able to do anything in Europe, to not cause any distraction in Europe. So if two countries have 350,000 troops in peace times, so 700,000 altogether, not a single country, even a country like Russia, will even make a motion to attack us. So, but for that, both Ukraine and Poland needs to be strong and capable. And it's most idiotic when, in interest and financial interests of a few grain dealers, we need to sacrifice our long-term interests locally. So, yeah, I'm in agreement they need to be punished for these illegal trades. And of course, we understand that the United States and Poland will be putting these and their strategic interests above these small grain dealings that were happening. And of course, our allies, our United States and Poland, are very vocal expressing that, and I think we need to follow suit and punish people and preclude this situation from happening ever again. Okay, that's a very good answer, I think. here's another news from Romania. They actually implemented a no-fly zone on the border between them and Ukraine, and they implemented them from the 13th of September, 20-30 kilometers from Romania-Ukraine border, up to 5 kilometers height, is a no-fly zone. And this is being implemented in the light of Russian UAVs using that territory, using that corridor to sneak upon Ukraine, and some of the missiles that they used along this corridor as well. And I think now Romanians understand the price they will have to pay if they don't do that. And they don't have any wishful thinking here, right? No pink glasses. Right, no pink glasses. They understand that the grain deal and everything, this is big money for them. Ukraine is sending a lot of grain through them. There are secondary, tertiary effects in their economy. And now we have, for the first time, the NATO country saying that they will be shooting down Russian means if they invade in their airspace. This is basically war actions, so we understood. And Romanians are not afraid to do that. This is the reflection of the cost of the price, of that interest that they have with us. And that's another signal for us that if our allies will have significant interest in Ukraine, for example, dozens of production facilities, a lot of agriculture dealings, connections, then the question of how to protect that will be solved almost automatically. Because right now, these interests between Ukraine and Romania are probably 1/100th of what they could be. We've been just starting that, and Romania is already coming out saying, yeah, we're ready to shoot down Russian Shahids and some of their missiles that were using that airspace to attack Ukraine. And this is a very important thing we need to understand. Our allies are eager to protect their interests. And we need to reinforce, again, our relations with our neighbors and reinforce economic relations aspect as well. So I have a question. What were we doing all the time, right? Why did not we put more emphasis on our relations? When from Ukrainian bureaucrats or administrative personnel on this intermarium symposium, you hear questions, what is it? What is that intermarium? That's a good question, right? What were they thinking about? What were they doing? Remember, we had a guest from Poland here, Patrick, right? Yeah, we were ready to invest into 40 airfields in Ukraine, 40 airports in Ukraine, and since you didn't provide enough support, we can only invest in 8. So that's the quality of politics we have to upgrade, because when our representative of government on that intermarium is asking questions, what is this conference about? This is, I think, a serious drawback. So right now, that's a good example of when Romania has some interest, not even strategic, just current interest. They did a quick consultation with NATO, with United States, and they came out and said, yes, we will be implementing a no-fly zone, we'll be shooting everything that Russia decides to fly there. And NATO already is placing a detachment of fighters on Romanian territory. And it's only about grain. Now, imagine if the question was, if area in question was dozens of high-tech companies or tens of billions of investments, which they are actually offering to us, and we're not realizing them right now. Ukraine even doesn't need to be part of NATO at this moment. NATO will fight for Ukraine militarily if need be. So this is how you create the right conditions for your allies to help you. Because nobody in the West will allow for their business investments to be destroyed by some invading force. And of course, we'll need to join NATO or will join NATO, but on some conditions, right now we're not in NATO. They already are signing up for us. So our path is pretty straightforward. We need to grow all kinds of connections with our neighbors. We are in the ideal phase. They understand their long-term interests with us. This is not old Europe that is still discussing how this war needs to be over. It's not the United States that is discussing how to play long-term. Our immediate neighbors understand really well what Russian Federation is, and they're eager to help us with any way they can. And they're bringing NATO capabilities to that. And the question is our politics and our what do we do, which is so far has been not very satisfactory. So for Ukraine, it's a good opportunity to come up with initiatives in the framework of Intermarium, of that symposium, and create a good trading ground involving our neighbors. And instead of fighting with Poles and others who are actually part of that Intermarium group, we could actually create our own grain OPEC equivalent with our neighbors. And that would allow us to, similar to the oil organization of countries of oil exporters. So we could do the same thing with grain and work together, work jointly with our neighbors, and then bring stronger players who are more strong in other aspects of agriculture world, and make this an international organization, and place this trade somewhere in Gdansk on Poland, so they would be happy being a transit point. So, and this is nothing outwardly in these initiatives. This is very straightforward and simple work. It just you need to go out and play and be smart about it, and don't forget your strategic priorities. That also because of several graves and other conflicts that we had with Poland back in the 20th century and other neighbors, we should not be quarreling with any of them. We should be working closer, because these are not that important in light of global demand and global questions and problems that Ukraine is now solving. Correct. One cannot put government interests in dependence of several pawns, even if they elevated themselves to the queen status, some or became some economic barons. You cannot put country strategic interests under that, below that. And look, there is same situation in Russia. They currently do not have, they have the same issue. They don't have enough storage facilities, and they need to transport grain somewhere. So if we manage to establish that sort of grain association, grain group here, we could have collectively worked with Russia to make sure they do not affect the market negatively with their product. We could actually guide them to the price points that we can appreciate, that we can use. So yeah, that would be a good solution for that situation. What are we doing in this regard? We're not taking new investments. We are quarreling with our neighbors about the grain aspect, with the closest neighbors from whom we depend completely. Can we afford such politics? Smart politicians work in a way that increases the number of their allies. Not so smart people are increasing the number of their enemies. We're usually doing that internally. Like our society, we know how we pick on each other and find enemies internally. But we should not be doing that outside, outwardly. And that's in the situation when some people are leaving Ukraine, fleeing Ukraine, and ready to study other languages in Europe just to not be attacked that much and not to. They're choosing what to do. And because of these small interests of several entrepreneurs, we're risking our strategic interests globally. That's not the right position, right? I concur, Alexey. Yeah, I'm with you on this. Remember, they were implemented an oil corridor for Russia, given that Russia is using their energy resources as weapons. They're using grain as weapons too, so it makes sense if we organize together and create a grain corridor for Russia as well, so they cannot use it militarily for their interests. There are a couple more news from Germany, and I would probably unite it together with this aspect. So, internally, Germany is still in discussion. Outside, yeah, there was a statement that they're ready to support Ukraine till 2032. But internally, there is a lot of infighting. They're increasing pressure on Scholz to provide Ukraine Taurus missiles, air defense systems, tanks, APC carriers, and that was signed by a bunch of congressmen in Germany. And on the eve of Ramstein, that will happen on the 18th of September. At the same time, Germany increased oil imports from Russia 12-fold. They're buying them through India, where India is buying it directly from Russia. And in addition to that, European Union will exclude Russian oligarchs Shulgin, Berezkin, and Akhmedov from the sanctions list. And I'm uniting these two news into the same spectrum. Great. This is continuation of the red line of this stream, I think. Real economic interests work. So Germany has real economic interest to buy oil, and they are doing that. On the other hand, they also have real interest in making sure Russia loses in this war. And that's what we're seeing. And again, the more Europe will be working with Ukraine economically, the more support we'll have. Because right now we're riding the value train. We're saying we're fighting for democracy, for peace, for a Western view of the world. That's all good. But what's the economic value? What's the economic balance between Ukraine and Germany? What is the economic balance between Germany and Russia? We understand that there'll always be tempting for some businessmen to do business as usual with Russia because economy takes over in many things. And we'll be what? Talking about values? But we'll be getting less aid. Even if they'll support us, we will be getting less of it because if we do not have their core economic interest here. So that strategy of telling the world how beautiful and fluffy we are without building strong economic relations, that's somewhat concerning for me. All right. Next news is the International Criminal Court opened an office in Kiev. General Prosecutor Andrei Kostin and Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the International Court. This is a new chapter in our work, and the work of that court in Ukraine will increase the speed and effectivity of cooperation between two structures and will help in tracing more crimes that Russia is doing daily against the citizens of Ukraine. How important that news do you think in light of the events we're discussing? I think that's the further institutionalization of the group of International Court that was working here. Before that, there was just a group. Now they actually have an address and an office. Very important because crimes against humanity and war crimes, they do not have expiration date. You cannot get amnesty on these crimes, and that means that we get support in long-term prosecution of Russian criminals, Russian military criminals, which is great for us, and it's also a very strong instrument of pressure on Russia, and the fact that it's being institutionalized can be just welcomed. And okay, in parallel with that, Alexey, Armenia is also voting on International Criminal Court, but as Pashinyan said, it is not related to Russia, and we have a political will to institutionalize in Armenia. This is not directed at Russia, it is related with questions of our security. How do we interpret that? Oh yeah, that's exactly directed against Russia, and this is Pashinyan's policies to continue breaking apart with Russia, because he understands that Russia is playing on the side of Turkey and Azerbaijan on that board, is not an aid to Armenia. Erdogan actually came out with suggestions how to settle everything down, and it smells very much like gunpowder on the front there, so Erdogan and Azerbaijan are trying to figure out how to solve these matters on a summit. And Armenia is now realizing that they'll be 1 against 3, even though Russia is mentioned on the summit, even though Russia is mentioned as the supporter of Armenia, they understand that Russia will be playing with Azerbaijan and Turkey. So they're seeing it's their real politics. They're seeing the picture and they're talking about the NATO joining. Remember those conversations we had a few weeks ago? So, and the visit of their leadership to Ukraine. This is all the symbolic gestures showing the radical distancing between Armenia and Russia. There were also statements by Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I think Karabakh problem will be solved in the new lights. And I sincerely wish to Armenian people and their elites where their strategic interests are lying, and I think they are in building strong and good relations with their immediate neighbors and not with some obscure country which you don't even have direct borders with, and that is prone to being a traitor in any situation when they see fit. So do you think Erdogan, with that conference, is he part of the influence of the United States in that region? No, I think it's Erdogan. It's his own. Turkey is minding their own interests. They're trading for some trade route that needs to go through the territory of Armenia in the perfect world. And this is an important route for them. It's potentially very huge money. You see what the United States offered India, right? And how China reacted to that for an opportunity to lose some transport corridors. And there are strategic interests there for tens of years ahead. So, of course, all sides will be trying to achieve peace and achieve agreement by all means necessary. And it's good that they are trying to do it politically rather than militarily. Russia, of course, also needs to resolve some economic interests there. And that's why they are playing on the side of Turkey, because that's where the interests lie. And I think Armenia now has an option to just basically strike a truce and accord with Azerbaijan and Turkey and find ways to cooperate together. And they're in a slow motion towards these goals. They already are understanding their true interests. They are surrounded by other countries on all sides, by Georgia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan, and they need to build good relations with these guys. And the illusion of the air bridge and supply from Russia that was there for a while, it's just an illusion. And when it came to a real question, real fighting, real need to be supported by Russia, Armenians understood that there won't be any of that help coming. All right, guys, one question I forgot to mention at the beginning. Please subscribe, like, and share. That helps us to bring more eyeballs to that stream. So if you have not done that yet, please do it. And now we'll have an important part that is dedicated to the United States. And there are a couple important news. First of all, Vietnam and the United States came out and said that they will be increasing their relations in defense sector and defense and security. So it seems like this is an additional element in the Indo-Pacific belt against China. How important is Vietnam in this regard? Vietnam is very important because this is protection of the southeastern flank, and Vietnam has direct influence on Cambodia and Burma. And in the end of the 70s, when China decided to invade Vietnam, Vietnam destroyed their troops, invading troops, in about 6 weeks. And China was smarter. They withdrew and did change their military and all. Actually, Putin was also ready at the beginning of war to withdraw, but then the other mood prevailed, and he decided to go for a long trek, paying with lives of Russians, and wasting their military capability on that, which is okay. So United States and Vietnam were for a while very vicious enemies. Vietnam War is part of now global culture, what it became in the 20th century. There are a lot of cultural artifacts and a ton of them on both sides. But time has passed. Vietnam managed somehow to implement some reforms, staying still a socialist state at its core. But they started economic and political relations with the United States a while ago, and now it's finally growing, blooming into possible unions. And that's how adults work when you have interests. Vietnam is a very important element. It has also ideological influence. It actually shows that, look, they're also a socialist country, but they have a different point of view from China, and that's ideological point. And also it can be used for bases, military bases for the jet fighters and other forces. This is a very important peninsula. And given the context of other hotspots of some islands that are, I think 5 countries are vying for, this is also the fact. There's also the fact that Chinese vessels, about 70 of them, are going through that zone, that sea zone adjacent to Vietnam. So if Americans will have more influence in that area, then it will be another arm to use against China in case of active conflict. And note that in this delegation, and these politicians who are discussing that on both sides between Vietnam and the United States, there likely are people who were involved in that military conflict back in the day, who lost their friends, their comrades in this war, but they're eager to work as adults and sit down at the same table together to resolve current problems that life puts in front of both countries. We got things to learn from them. Anthony Blinken read a long speech at the Anthony Hopkins University titled American Diplomacy in the New Era. He said a lot of interesting points. He addressed why America is investing in foreign politics, where is America now, at the beginning of epoch of the geopolitical storm, what is the Biden administration position globally, and he achieved certain conclusions. So America is strong on the external arena only when it is very strong internally. Lack of that internal cohesion doesn't allow us to do effective external politics. America also cannot be alone in resolving major tasks. That's why we're always looking for allies. Number three is we're treating the weakening of our position globally and new players coming out in the world with the Christian acceptance. We understand these are long-term processes. And as for Ukraine and Russia, American position is to not allow Russia to achieve strategic success in Ukraine. And according to him, he acknowledged that Russia wanted to destroy Ukrainian identity as part of this war. And one of the tasks is to help Ukraine to become a strong country and become capable of self-defense together with NATO. And American support to Ukraine will not be forever. So, Alexey, you. Couple of things here. It's basically a civil war, ideological civil war happening in the United States right now. They're so viciously fighting internally, both sides of political spectrum, and the main thing is that they're ignoring both sides by default. And the elites on both sides, they're just refusing to listen to the other side. They think by default that nothing good comes out of the mouth there. And right now, Republicans are implementing the impeachment proceedings against the current president, so it doesn't aid more money, more energy into correlating or acting together. At the same time, they did have a centric group appear, which is comprised of people from both flanks, but they actually do find common language and they find ways to talk to each other. And unlike the extremes of the spectrum who are viciously engaged in vicious fighting, the central group actually does something productive. And that's what Blinken refers to when he is talking about difficult situation in the American inner politics, because they cannot be an active international player to the degree that they want to, while there is such a severe infighting happening internally. And second moment about the place of America in the world, they understand that the dynamics when Americans had hegemony and were the strongest player has passed. The trends are changing, and now they're reflecting on that publicly. We've been talking about that, I think, for about 10 years already. And remember, Fukuyama announced the end of history, and it didn't happen. It's a post-Fukuyama world. That's what's happening. During that end of history, Americans made, and the other countries made a ton of strategic mistakes. They let Putin grow as a figure. And now this is being acknowledged and is being fixed by establishing new relations with India, as with new China. China is being left alone in the face of a new crisis that they're already well into. There'll be industrialization of India in the interests of the West. I think the global infrastructure corridors will be shifting, and the system of world trade will be changing. So no end of the world is happening, and they're reflecting on that publicly, and they're looking for a position and place of United States in that new world picture, including the interactions with the global South and such. And of course, Ukraine is one of the hottest topics in the world now that is being discussed in the United States as well, internally. At least because Biden family was very well connected with Ukraine, and the topic is often being peddled by both sides. Plus, it's a big war, and a lot of money being spent on supporting of Ukraine. And what is he saying about Ukraine, right? He's not saying there should not be any Russian soldier on Ukraine, or Russia should be destroyed militarily. He's not saying that. He's saying that Ukraine identity should not be destroyed, right? So if 17% of our territory remains occupied, is our identity going to be gone? No. So they're talking about the global parameters. He didn't say anything about territorial losses, but he just made a statement that he doesn't want Russia to win. He also is saying that support of Ukraine will not be without a timestamp. So here's a question. When is the timestamp? Is that 2032, 2035, 2020 something? So the conclusion here is that we should be immediately, right now, in the force majeure environment, rebuilding our economic and military industries. And this will allow us to build better relations not only with the United States, but also with our immediate neighbors, because they are the first ones interested in our success. Because our diplomacy also needs to come out and announce the same thing, that post-Fukuyama world is happening. The end of the story period is over. We're now in the phase of hot instability. And in order for us to survive or just preserve our identity, we need to run on that track much faster. That escalator is trying to take us down. We need to run so fast to stay in the same level, to allow our country to live in this extraordinary situation. It doesn't mean that we all need to wake up at 5 o'clock and do gymnastics and, sing songs about Ukraine. We need to create an environment for businesses to bring more money, to start investing, to start joint ventures. If India is becoming popular now with America, what relations are with India? What do we have in terms of relations with India? How are we going to incorporate ourselves in the change of these trade routes? And there are three versions here that can happen. We need to be playing forward with the top of this group. We can be playing on the medium level with most of the countries, and we can be dragging behind. Right now, we are dragging behind. Even to run with the main group of countries will take a lot of resources for us in the current state. But we need to understand that we need to rely on ourselves. There is nobody else to rely on. There was another element in Blinken's statement, Yuri. He brought up a question about the systems of arms that the United States is supplying Ukraine with. When we talk about how to use the arms we provided by Ukraine, we leave that choice with Ukraine. We're not guiding them and directing them. We do not appreciate them using it on Russian territory, but ultimately the choice is with Ukraine. Yes, so this is a very interesting turn of position. Many people notice that. Those who analyze that in the world, they already reflected on that, and let us comment on this too. Using some air means against Sevastopol, some of the missiles and UAVs indicates that we got new capabilities to break through Russian air defense systems. We will not talk about what did we use and what did we get, but trust me, this is the beginning of a new phase of this story. And the growth of our military capabilities. This will continue growing. And at the end, there'll be that question that General Zaluzhny commented on in September last year, right? About the parity with Russia. As long as we do have a parity, ultimately, Russia will not invade again. If we do not have a parity, we cannot talk about winning this war. So we need to have a long-hand capability, long-reach capability. And even though there is a ton of targets on the territory of Ukraine, it is not enough to just hit them. The price that Russian Federation is paying for this war needs to be increasing constantly. They need to understand that continuation of this war means continuation of weakening of Russia. There basically has to be an equal sign. The scientific centers need to be blown up periodically, oil, refineries, gas pipelines, military key elements, military infrastructure key elements need to be attacked as well. This is the only tool to actually enforce them to stop from this war, from even looking into this war again. This should be the key element of our politics. Before that, we've been told, no, don't hit the territory of Russia. Now that no disappeared. And if it disappeared, that means yes. And that means, well, hello guys, here's a lot coming on your heads. and you deserved it. And that's wonderful, because part of these capabilities is done in cooperation, I think, with the West. All right, great. Elon Musk made a decision to transfer to Pentagon some management of the Starlink satellite system. This is what his biographist Isaacson commenting in his interview to Washington Post. According to Isaacson, Musk decided to go for this because he was concerned with a bunch of critique that he received, and he doesn't want to be the key element of that decision making. So he is giving some authority to Pentagon. Seems like Pentagon pressed enough on Musk. Right, Nikolai. Pentagon and public opinion. For these limitations that he described last week, that basically limited Ukraine or prevented Ukraine from attacking Russian naval vessels. Did you see the face of Musk when the journalist was trying to ask him this question? Musk was really seriously criticized. And since he is pretending to be, as one of the richest businessmen in the world, to be a leader, a national leader in some capacity, so these ideological dead ends, they actually destroy his value, his position. So it's easier for him to just relieve that and give it to Pentagon. This was a mistake, and it was a mistake that he made. He did mention before that he believed Antonov, Russian ambassador, that Russia will use nukes if Crimea is being attacked. And the fact that Musk believed that, which one could draw from his statement, it just shows that he doesn't have a high class of understanding of the international politics, which is also not a vignette on his portrait. By the way, one of the Russian ships went out to sea to fight with drones, and now it's being towed back because the same drones damaged it quite a bit, so it's being towed back to Sevastopol. I think it stayed for about a day at sea. It was trying to fight these drones, and overwhelmed and damaged, he is being towed back. And I think that Russian naval fleet in Crimea is done with strategically. As the result of this war, their detachments and their capabilities basically will cease to exist. One needs to add here that 3 big ships for delivering personnel, they're trying to move from Black Sea to Azov Sea. Oh, we'll reach them in Azov Sea as well with these new growing capabilities, not an issue. So yeah, this question is still open, what will be with Sevastopol, because as a naval base for Russia, it is losing completely in these conditions when Ukraine is starting to use missiles. They will not be able to feel themselves comfortably there with Sevastopol and the whole Crimea, because they initially, Yuri, were building up Crimea as the unsinkable aircraft carrier. They had several airfields and a lot of naval vessels. That all will be destroyed, just like we promised them. Do not come fighting with us. There is one more topic I wanted to touch today that was trending since yesterday. This was, and Russia is using it actively. This was the statement made by Poltava Regional Lieutenant Colonel Vitaly Berezhnoy on the 27th session of their Poltava City Council or Congress, Regional Congress. He promised to help with new bodies to the front, with more drafting initiatives. But what became interesting for people, and I'm quoting here, that only about 20 of the 100 are still intact. The rest are wounded or dead and cannot continue fighting anymore. And that caused a huge splash in media with a lot of questions. Is this the true picture of our losses? And I think we need to react to that, because we need to explain the context in which the statement was made. So, as far as I know, and it would be good to hear from somebody who is in military leadership in Ukraine, not me, but as far as I know, we have, of course, serious losses. But let's look in details. Since last mobilization, the year of intensive war, one of the biggest wars in Europe since the Second World War, and the second intensive fighting since the Iran-Iraq war. He's saying 80% are not part of the 100 that were drafted anymore. So out of that number, I would say 20 of 80 probably dead, about 40 wounded, and about 17, 20 remaining are transferred to a lighter version of service due to illnesses or something. Is it a lot or not for a year? It depends where they were fighting, which detachments were they fighting in. You cannot just take an average temperature, because they could have been fighting in the hottest parts of the front, and that would be the results. But the fact that mobilization is ongoing, it's not in waves, it's continuing. And we also need to understand that we need to have enough density of our troops to counter Russian masses of people. And this is also a problem, because we're not interested in this kind of war, right? We're interested in fast victory and saving our people to the maximum. And this is not just a question of mobilization, but also military preparedness. One can compare the losses that are carried by the 3rd Brigade, which we mentioned today, or the 12th Azov, or the losses of the usual motorized brigade. And the difference will be very big. We also need to remember that we need new allies, and we need new capabilities, and that's why we need to create new troops. So we are getting more people, we are mobilizing more people to fit the new military units that are being formed. They're being mobilized not to just cover the losses in the existing ones, but we're also building new detachments, because we're getting more equipment. And it's the same, generally speaking. I think we are 5-7 times less in terms of losses versus Russia. And I would highlight that people who are in charge of covering these questions, they need to be more active and more open. And of course, there was recent communication about how do we mobilize the ones who have limited capacity for service. And we also need a more coherent messaging in terms of losses, in terms of numbers. And one needs to understand that there is also propaganda in these statements very often. Russia is heavily investing in the propaganda. And we should get away from the videos when there are military-dressed people capturing somebody on a city street and dragging them to the military unit, because the man in uniform should not be seen as a threat. We need to rethink that policy. And I said before that all the volunteers are already at the front. So now the government needs to find a good way how to draft people who do not want to be on the front, how do you train them, and how do you make a fighting power out of them. You cannot just take them by force. This is a wrong approach. You need to find a way how to draft them and then turn them into an effective power, effective troop on the front. And it can be done different ways. There should be good messaging, there should be good data. I don't think how successful or smart was it from that lieutenant colonel who decided to scare everybody else by saying that 80 of 100 didn't come back, so let's get more people. I don't think it's a good inspirational message. And I think somebody needs to come out on the higher level and explain, just like we did right now, somebody from the highest level of command of the country, where are these 80? And new mobilization is not about losses, it's about creating new detachments as well, because our capability is growing. And maybe not open numbers, because I understand this is secret, but at least explain what's happening. According to my data, we are suffering fewer losses than during the active fights in Popasna, Lysychansk, and those early phases of war. And this is even when we do have severe fighting at the pistol distance, when we are, you see some videos from Bakhmut in that area. one could have come out and said that we are fighting better, that even despite all these graphic videos and things happening and our achievements on the front, we are suffering less casualties than before. We need to have a strong communication line, strong strategic communication line with society, because such input, including Russian PSYOP inputs, will be causing more turbulence in our society and more concerns in our society. And given these videos that are rather often surfacing up where military commissars are just grabbing people out in the streets, this is a serious blowback, going to cause a serious blowback in our society. And if we go in a serious juxtaposition against the military authorities in the country, we will lose this war as a society. So we need military and leadership needs to be more active, explaining who goes where, what is being sent. Very few people get to the units that are capable and actively fighting on the front, maybe only 20%. The rest are being sent to other places. There's a lot of military work to do. And I actually have to clarify, I looked up a few things. It actually was only about the city council. It wasn't even a regional council. And he was just comparing with other cities in Poltava region. And that's in relation to what he mentioned, these numbers. It wasn't even reflective of the whole situation about the region. Right, but it has to be a managed process. It shouldn't be a statement made by a person responsible for mobilization in one city that causes an uproar in the whole country. I don't think he was even thinking about that. He was trying to fulfill his duty to mobilize more people. But it is bad when the whole country goes in the uproar for a day discussing the statement of one lieutenant colonel and the session of a city council. It should be managed from the Ministry of Defense, General Command, communication lines, those people who form the military politics and then use defense means accordingly. They need to be explaining what is mobilization, what are the goals, etc. Because military themselves, the servicemen, they're pretty straightforward. Yeah, they're waging this war. They are the ones fighting. So if they need people, they'll come out and say, yeah, we need people. Get dressed and let's get going. But there is a strategic communication that needs to be present from the highest level. What is happening, why, and how. All right, gentlemen, we've been more than 1 hour live. And I think we do have more news, but let's put a pause here. Let's wait for Monday, right? If we have a stream on Monday, yes, our streams I think will be uninterrupted next week. I just had a pretty tight schedule and couldn't really do anything this week. So I think we'll continue. Well, they'll be a little shorter, informative, and very rhythmic on our usual schedule. I just want to say that I'll do another mono stream in about an hour. I wanted to address some internal bickering that people were talking about this week while we were gone. And I don't want to bring it up as the fight with languages and the rights and freedoms. And I just want to emphasize that rights and freedoms need to be at the core of our country. So I wrote a big post today in Telegram. It's linked in my channel, so don't forget to come and subscribe at 11 p.m. Ukraine time. I'll turn on the mono stream. All right, great. And let's say bye at this note. Subscribe to Alexey Arestovych, Yuriy Romanenko, and Alpha&Omega, and of course to Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English language. And if you want to aid more, do not forget to become a sponsor to any of the channels. We appreciate your attention. Thank you and have a good night.